3.5 years old, Nate was having reoccurring ear infections, which brought them to a well-respected ENT office. They were waiting for the doctor to return with his residents, and when he did, he was carrying a very large medical textbook. He walked over to Eileen, handed her the book, and pointed to the words, Digeorge Syndrome, and said, "I think this is what Nate has." In complete state of shock, Eileen returned to her car and began to cry, not knowing what this meant for her son. In that moment, she was battling two emotions: relief that she had finally had an answer, and guilt for not figuring out Nate's diagnosis sooner. This was the beginning of Eileen and Nate's 22Q journey. Hello and welcome to the 22Q podcast. My name is Becky White, and today we have Eileen with us. I met Eileen at the 22Q Moms Retreat hosted by the 22Q Family Foundation. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you. I know when I first met you at the first retreat many years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, however many it was, I was just, we were able to chat a lot more, and it was just such a joy to chat with you. And when I started this podcast, you were one of the moms I thought of right away. And I said, got to have her on. She has so much wisdom. And I just also wanted to hear a little bit more about your son. But before we start all that, please introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do, and your family.
Sure. Hi, I'm Eileen Nordemyer, and I am mom to Nate, who is 13, and he has 22q11.2 deletion syndrome. I'm also mom to Claire, who is 15, and my husband is Jeff. We live in the Chicagoland area. Can't forget, my dog just came in, our dog Lucy. My background is I am a speech language pathologist, and I've done that for about 27 years. And I've done it all throughout the course of my career. I've done pediatrics and adults, inpatient, outpatient, rehab, nursing home, early intervention, you name it, I've done it. And right now, what's really nice about being a speech pathologist is that there's a lot of flexibility and variability in what you can do with this degree. So I'm currently working at a hospital with adults in rehab and acute care, and I'm in a registry position. So I have regular days, but then I also pick up extra days as needed. And that's been really great because it allows me the flexibility to say I can work or I can't work, or I need to leave by 3 or can't start until 10. And although I miss working with kids, this, really fits our needs a lot better.
Right.
And I've also started doing some executive function coaching as well for a private company, which I really enjoy. So.
Wow. What a fulfilling role you have.
Yeah. I was doing it at home with my own kids. So I'm like, sure. I have the added benefit of seeing it from a professional eye as well as a personal eye. And I think that really helps with these families because, I live it as well as, being informed on the best ways to work around it.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you have a layer of sympathy or empathy that other clinicians might not have?
Oh God, 100%, because it's very easy as a therapist to recommend things, but then as a parent to actually be able to do them is a lot harder. And that's something I never knew before I had kids with, special needs. And now it's like, okay, well, I know this is what you want, but the reality of how we're going to get there is much different when you live that every day, as opposed to just making a recommendation as a professional.
Absolutely. And how did you get drawn into the profession of speech pathology?
I don't really know. I think I started off really in education. I knew I'm a helper, I'm a doer, I'm a talker, I'm a people person. And then I remember one of my cousins who is in teaching saying, don't go into teaching, especially in Illinois. It's just too hard to get into a good district. So I was looking for another helping type profession. And I really liked that speech pathology is a mix of science and the arts. So, there's a little bit of both, which met my interest area. Got to work with people, and it's an ever evolving field as well. There's a lot of new research and things change. So, I'm not doing things the way that I did 20 years ago. So that's appealing as well.
Yeah. No, I've always found it so fascinating. And
it's really broad too. Like I said, you can talk to 5 different therapists and everybody does something a little bit different. So it's nice to have those options.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And tell us about your family. Tell us about Nate.
Sure. So, oh,
Oh,
sorry.
tell us about Lucy.
I know. She's being picky right now. So Nate, in many ways, is your average 13-year-old kid. He's likes video games and playing with his friends, and he has a lot of outside interests that he does. Does well in school, but has to work really hard at it. Um, he One of the things that impresses me most about him is that he's willing to take on anything and try new things without fear, it seems. He recently started doing boxing for fitness, and it's awesome. Didn't know anybody in the class. It's just like, yeah, sure, I'll try that, and he does this other activity called Leader Shop in our community, which has service and social opportunities for junior high kids and high schoolers. And, took on some leadership with that, which we had never really seen before. He's always willing to do and try new things. This past summer, he went to the 22Q Dragonfly Forest Camp out in Pennsylvania. So had never done anything like that before in his life, halfway across the country. Never, no, not a hesitation. He was ready to try horseback riding and be away from
Yeah.
us and no contact with us for a week, which in all likelihood was probably harder on me, than it was on him. But that's really nice to see for
Yeah.
a teenager that he's willing to put himself out there and do those things, and
Yeah.
he doesn't let any of the challenges that he have kind of stop him in that area.
Yeah. Did he enjoy the camp?
Oh my God, it was awesome. He
Yeah.
immediately was like, I want to go back for 2 weeks next year. And, he made friends and gained independence, and there were shenanigans, and he, had a camp nickname. I mean, it was like everything we would have hoped for him. So,
That's
um,
amazing.
yeah, it was a
Good.
great experience.
I've been looking into that camp as well. My son's only 8, but it
Yeah.
seems like an amazing camp. I'm definitely going to pick your brain about it later on.
You should. I highly
Yeah.
recommend it.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad that he's getting out there. I'm glad that he's trying new things and
Right.
boxing. Wow. I would love to see a video of that. Um, Start from the beginning, talk about when you got pregnant with him, when you started to maybe find out that something was going on, and
Sure.
when you got your diagnosis.
Yeah. So, our road to diagnosis really, I think, highlights the need for better awareness and education and information for the medical community, because Nate didn't get diagnosed until about 3.5 years of age. And it all started back at my 20-week ultrasound. They were keeping a close eye on me since I was advanced maternal age. And we went in for the appointment and had done it with my daughter, so knew it was this joyous and exciting, event. And I'll just kind of never forget the quiet panic in the room, and the doctor not saying anything and just getting up and leaving. And we're trying not to panic now. And it turns out he was looking for a cardiologist because they were having a hard time visualizing Nate's pulmonary ventricle, and there was a cyst on his brain, and there was some issues with his kidneys. But they really kind of just sent us on our way and said, "We'll come back in a couple of weeks and let's see how it looks," which is the longest weeks of our lives.
What were you,
When
yeah, what did you do in that moment?
I in that moment, I think we were just shell shocked, and there was really nothing that we could do but wait and give it time. And we did. And when we went back, his ultrasound was perfect. It was beautiful. They couldn't see a thing. So much to the point that our then pediatrician made some comment about, sometimes it's not good to see these kids so early because they're still developing. And the rest of my pregnancy was uneventful. We had a scheduled C-section. We did have a team there. A cardiologist was there, and a neonatologist and stuff, just to make sure. And delivery was fine. Afterwards, everything was fine. All the tests that they did with him. I remember early on that he struggled a bit with feeding, and a harder time coordinating his suck, swallow, breathe, and a little bit of nasal regurgitation coming out the nose. And that's part of what I do for a living. So I was able to have some experience with that, and did talk with the feeding specialist at the hospital, and we were able to manage it. And went home, and then for the next 3.5 years, he just started having what I like to say is a little bit of everything, but nothing so severe that any red flags were raised. So He started having some constipation and reflux and some issues with his formula, but so did my daughter. So, we managed that. And he started having some slower weight gain, but he was following the curve, so we just kept an eye on that. He was sick a little bit more, but never anything that got him into the emergency room. And when he started walking, he had some low tone, and his feet were turned in a little, but PT, we were able to manage that. When he started talking, I noticed that some of his early speech sounds were off. So I again worked with him on that, and we were able to make progress. And it wasn't until he was about 3.5 years of age that he was having recurrent ear infections. So that brought us to ENT. And this was an ENT that was well respected in the community at a large, teaching university. And, I remember meeting with him and talking about what was going on. And he had some residents with him. It was a teaching facility. And he left the room with the residents, which I thought nothing of it, because that happens all the time when, you're at you have students in with the doctor, and came back and handed me like a medical textbook and kind of pointed and said, "This is what I think he has." No other words of support, encouragement, advice. This is, prognosis, anything. Just, you need to go to genetics and get this blood work done. And I remember just very much being in shock at that time, just trying to absorb all of this. And then going to the car, and of course, breaking down at that time. And I did what, they tell you not to do, which is Google. I Googled it, and, just really was crying for so many things. And the first was just the unknown, what this meant for my son, what this meant for us as a family, what would this entail? I cried some for relief in finally having an answer as to why all of these things were happening. But also knowing that it was true, because looking at these kids, Nate looked like them, like, you could tell. And I cried a lot for guilt, for not having caught it sooner, for not realizing or, pushing to see what else is happening. Up until that point, Nate had probably seen at least 12 different specialists in different areas. And I count myself in that group. And, everyone is so pigeonholed into looking at to just their area that no one looked bigger. And, thinking back on my career, it was, looking like, did I ever have a kid with this diagnosis? And I remember that I did, but she called it cardiofacial syndrome. And she presented so differently than Nate. She had multiple cardiac surgeries. She had a trach. She, was nonverbal. And, that's the thing with this diagnosis. There's just 200 different manifestations of it, and no kid presents in the same way. So it's easy to overlook that. And I think that looking back on it as his parent and as his mom, I know I did right? I helped get him eating. And, with the speech, learning later that he had velopharyngeal insufficiency, I helped prevent some of the compensatory speech sounds. A lot of times kids will start trying to use the back of their throat inappropriately because they're trying so hard to get that closure that's not there. And I know I helped prevent that logically. I know I did right by him.
You absolutely did.
But emotionally, I also know that feeding and speech were the two things that would have gotten him to ENT sooner. So I know by doing that, I also prolonged our path to diagnosis. So that's something I carry with me.
Yeah. It's natural as moms to carry guilt and why didn't I?
Right.
Why didn't I do that sooner? That's my job to protect and my job to make sure he's okay. And I just want to say on a personal note, you did an extraordinary job.
Thanks.
I wish my son had seen a speech pathologist sooner. Are you kidding? It's interesting because you did have that background.
Right.
So you knew how to help him.
Right.
Where most of moms and most parents don't. As you said, he presents differently.
Right.
And so it was just finally putting all those pieces together. And I kind of want to go back to where the doctor just shows you the textbook. And
Sure.
did he have, or the doctor have any sort of advice for you, or just said, this is what I think he has, you need to go to genetics?
To be fair, I'm sure that my protective memory is not, I'm sure he may have said more than that, but that was the takeaway that I got
Yeah.
from it. So, to this day, 10 years later, I don't have memory of him. Here's this foundation to look into, or this may be this, or, these kids, he'll have a long life, or, he has there
Mhm.
was none of that came along with it. I think it was much more clear cut. This
Mhm.
is what I think, and this is what you need to do.
And you were alone at the appointment with Nate?
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny because I asked my husband, I said, do you remember the day that we got the diagnosis? Do you remember me telling you? Because I don't remember it. And he said, I do remember you were in the car and you called me. And like that was that, the memory that he had of it as well, so much. I think,
Yeah.
we kind of pack that stuff away.
Yeah.
You don't remember all the details of it, but you do remember the feeling that, came along with it.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I can tell it's extremely painful to go back to that, and that you carry that with you, and it's a lot.
Yeah, and it just goes with what you said, like as mom and in this role, we are constantly reevaluating ourselves and are we doing the right thing? Should we be doing more? What else is out there? She's doing this, should I be doing that? And it's a never-ending battle.
Mhm.
And sometimes you really just have to stop and remind yourself that you are doing the best for your kid, with what you have, where you are, and, in that time. And that's all that you really can expect of yourself. Because if not, it's just so easy to go crazy because there's just too much to think. And you have to put your trust in the right people and in the right professionals and use your own judgment to, make this path and make the best choices for your kid.
Mhm. And after you got the diagnosis, what was next for Nate?
Uh, so, then uh, I used Google for good, I would say, so you found the good organizations, found the support that was out there. At the time it was the Dempster Family Foundation, which then turned into the 22Q Family Foundation. And we started with all our medical appointments, just, making sure that there wasn't anything else that we were missing. And that is just so much of your life early on after diagnosis is just appointment after appointment after appointment and kind of figuring out where you are. Then you kind of settle into things. And, that's when I reached out more for support. And so, found Dempster Family Foundation, found Nationwide Children's Hospital in Ohio,
Mhm.
which is has fantastic 22Q clinic. Wound up, we live in a large metropolitan area. I am in no need of hospitals and physicians, but we are fortunate enough that we are able to find these facilities that provide the best care and utilize them. So we went out there and saw their team there,
Mhm.
and which is, where they discovered the velopharyngeal insufficiency, wound up going out to Ohio to have the surgery, had it at Nationwide. And don't regret that at all. But,
Mhm.
really began to educate myself, um, educate our families, our friends, find the support that we needed to kind of
Mhm.
navigate what this
Right.
meant for us at that time and what it
Yeah.
might mean going forward.
Mhm. And what operations did he end up having? You had mentioned that one.
Yeah, so that was his main one. We've been
Mhm.
very lucky. So oftentimes kids with 22Q have velopharyngeal insufficiency. And what that is they're, when we eat and when we make certain sounds, our soft palate will connect to the back of our throat. And these kids either have too much of a large space, or their soft palate doesn't move well enough. So then air can escape, food can escape, and they can't build up the pressure that they need often to make speech sounds or to eat. So one of the solutions is a surgery that they do where they take some tissue from the back of the throat and connect it with the soft palate. And they leave two kind of ports on the side to allow for drainage and airflow and things like that. So that was his major surgery, was that he had the pharyngeal flap created. He's also had ear tubes placed. He had a partial tonsillectomy. And then the one ear tube was in there for so long, we finally had to remove it. And he had to have a repair of his eardrum done, and patch repair of his eardrum done. So those were the main four that he's had.
Mm-hmm. And how are his ears now?
They're fine. The patch luckily seems to be working. So we
Good.
haven't had to go in. Hearing is okay. We haven't had to revise it or anything like that.
Good. That's excellent. Great. And how is his speech going?
Fine. He sounds great. It was a success. The surgery was a success. And, obviously working with me all through his life really helped prepare him. So I would say you probably wouldn't even notice
Wow.
if you didn't know him. So
That is huge. That is such a big hurdle for
yeah.
many families. And that is wonderful that he has
Yeah.
you. What did you find that his first year of life, or maybe at the 3.5, once you get the diagnosis, which one was more difficult with doctor's appointments and just balancing life?
Early on, because my daughter was just 2 years older, so I had two littles, and that was challenging in itself. But just having all these things popping up for him and not really knowing why, that it was one thing after another, proved that was challenging. But then, at 3.5 after the diagnosis, it's a whole nother level of challenging, because now you're looking for things that you didn't know you should be looking for. So now we're seeing endocrinology, and well, we're seeing, see if his kidneys are looking, and we're looking at all sorts of other things. So that was a whole new level of challenge, because it was endless appointments and blood draws and follow-ups, while at the same time having two preschoolers and trying to just live our life that way as well. So I don't know if I can compare them. I don't know if one was harder than the other. I think they were both challenging in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. How are his physical challenges? Does he have any physical challenges, such as like OTPT, toileting, mobility?
Sure. History of the motor delays with OT and PT and the speech delay, but really has, we did therapy in all of those areas and really doesn't have a need for them anymore. He's independent with, all of those other kind of ADL type things, activities of daily living. So, more of the medical things, I would say, are popping up now, in particular with puberty.
Yep.
You're seeing some changes with things we hadn't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's one of, the hard things about this diagnosis, is just the unknown, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you may think you're over one hurdle and then new hurdles present. And, not only medically, you don't know what's coming for you, but there's also all the unknowns about, mental health and, independence and what will come of that. But the perfect example I have is, so we saw this initial anomaly on his 20-week ultrasound, but then we had follow up with cardiac after he was born, and then after his diagnosis, and his heart, beautiful, no problems at all, thankfully. Right around 8 to 10 years old, we decided to start medication with him for ADHD. And we went back to cardiology before starting a stimulant, because that was recommended. You make sure the heart is okay for that. And then now all of a sudden we're seeing that there was problems with one of his waves. He was having a long QT segment. And then when they looked at the heart, like, oh, he has a dilated aortic arch and a right aberrant subclavian artery, and he has this small hole. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, we have been through this multiple times and never heard anything at all about this. And as it turns out, long QT was as a result of low calcium, which then brought us to endocrinology and brought on the diagnosis of hypocalcemia and hypoparathyroidism, which opened a whole new can of worms. So it's like we went in just thinking we're getting cleared for stimulants, and now all of a sudden we had all of these, cardiac things that we're keeping an eye on, and now all these things with endocrinology that we're having to manage, which we would have never even known were there. Right. So, for right now, heart looks good. The root isn't dilating anymore, so that's all good. We're just monitoring it every 2 years.
That's good.
Um, he's taking some medication for the hypocalcemia and is managing that. He still has some GI issues. We were talking earlier. He was home last night with some, up all night last night with reflux symptoms. So he's home today, but still has GI issues. Uh, Immunology, his immune system is a little bit low, but nothing that we need to treat. We just continue to manage that as well, or monitor that as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
I got to look on my list to see what
Yeah.
else.
No, that's fine.
Slow growth.
That's
But he's still following the curve, so we're managing that. He has, ADHD, he has anxiety, he has some issues with his eyes. He has strabismus, so his eye turns out, and that can affect, how the eyes work together and depth perception. And we did vision therapy in the past.
hmm
And some just of the immaturity that comes along, with the diagnosis as well. So again, he's a little bit of everything, but nothing so severe that, there's these major issues, but it's just still a lot on his plate to have to deal with, and a lot for us to continue to manage for him.
Yeah. Is he aware that he has 22q?
He is.
Hmm.
Yes, we've always talked about it
Hmm.
and always mentioned it, just kind of in a matter of fact way.
Hmm.
I'd say these past few years are the years where he's really started to um, resent it, to be upset by it, to wish he didn't have it. And he ties it into, a lot of the ADHD type things and the anxiety type things. And, this is because of my 22q. Um, but I think that's healthy. I think that he understands himself better that way. He knows, we'll often say, like if we're dealing with school or studying, and I'll say, well, how does your brain work? Right. And, what do you need to have happen? Right. And why do you need to take that little orange pill every day? So I think having a healthy awareness of that is good, because then you can kind of make sense. Like, this is why I'm feeling this way, or this is why I'm really tired today, or this is why my emotions are big, and it can give you some of the answers that you need to get the acceptance that you need to be able to handle these things and
Hmm.
move on with life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any advice for when, your son's coming to you with those heavy feelings, and rightfully so,
Right,
he didn't choose this. It just happened.
right. I
Any
think one of
advice?
the and one of the best things that we did was to always kind of talk about it from the start, and talk about it in a matter of fact way, right? It's not this is so horrible because of this. It's just, hey, yeah, we got to go get this x-ray because we need to take a look at this, because of your 22q. It's how you present those things. So you're kind of laying the groundwork that this is part of you and this is part of what you deal with. And then I think a lot of it is just validating, like you said, those feelings that they have in that time. Like, yeah, this does suck and I'm sorry, but this is what we are dealing with and this is how we're going to deal with it. And there is a plan A and a plan B. And you can manage the things that come your way.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that has helped in those moments.
Yeah. And speaking of management, I know you had mentioned that he struggles with ADHD, and
Mhm.
I know we have talked about before medication,
Yeah.
and how did you know, as his mom, when it was the right time to help medicate him? He needed more help through medication.
Yeah. We waited, we did, especially in the earlier grades. We tried, everything. He has an IEP, all sorts of accommodations, all sorts of sensory supports. I, we, I'm lucky that I'm well informed on it and kind of knew what approach to take. But then it kind of hit the level of, things are getting more challenging. And as far as school goes, the expectations are higher, the frustration level was higher. It's not that we were opposed to medicating. I think we just always wanted to try other options first. But I think when we got to that point, we knew it was worthwhile, just because we could see how much harder things were for him. And like anything else, if there's something that can help with that, why wouldn't we try?
Yeah. And go
Yeah.
with, evaluate. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's
Yeah.
really, really wonderful the way you approached it. Hmm. And it's helping him.
Yeah.
So that's great. We had talked about briefly, some of the organizations and resources that have helped you along the way. And
Yeah.
I know you mentioned the 22Q Family Foundation.
Right.
Are there any others that you want to share?
I definitely, again, the Nationwide Children's in Ohio, they do a conference every couple of years, which is fabulous. That was the first time I was ever in a room with other parents of kids with 22Q. And it sounds like hyperbole, but it really was life changing to get that experience. I do love Donna Cutler Landsman and all of her books, Educating Children with Mediocardiofacial Syndrome. Her book is a fantastic resource for every and all things education, which, you can also access her as a resource through the 22Q Family Foundation. And Nate's in the book too. There's a cute picture of him in there as well.
Get out.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I have to look. I have a copy too.
Yeah.
Aw.
I also, there's so many different Facebook groups. Not the I tend to like the ones that are more affirming and positive and supportive.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I also really utilize just local support groups for parents of kids with special needs, not necessarily 22Q. And I strongly recommend all parents make sure they do that, is find a network of other parents, who have this diagnosis. It's being able to talk with someone else who truly understands the things that you're going through is just invaluable. And that's not to say that the support of family and friends isn't worthy, because it is. It's so important in our life. But it just resonates differently when you're talking to a parent who knows what you know. And, just recently I was talking with two other 22Q moms, and we were talking about just traumatic medical experiences, testing gone wrong, things that we regretted or wish we had done differently. And my friend finished telling her story, and I kind of said to her, you know, uh, you got to let that go. It's okay to let that go. You did the best. You're a great mom. You did right by your kid. And then she turned and said the same thing to me. And I'd heard that advice before from many people, but it just meant a little something different, coming from her, because I know that she experienced it. You seek out, support from other parents from your school district, from your church, from your state agency, wherever you find it online. Because we recently heard a speaker talk about isolation and feelings of isolation, and it's so possible to feel isolated as a parent of kids with special need, even though you have support of your family, your friends, and the general community. You can still feel that isolation. And I really think the way to combat that is to talk with others who are experiencing the same things that you are.
Beautifully said. When do you feel times of isolation?
I think that having Nate not have his deficits be so severe and present, so typically looking to those who don't know, and to be involved in just general education and our local regular little league, and all of these types of activities that aren't geared toward kids with special needs. It's a challenge in those times, because you see how much harder they're working. You see the struggles they have. The reason why he might not be paying attention in right field, or whatever the case is. And in those times, it's the right place for him to be, because it's the right challenge for him. But you also feel like nobody else here understands why this is a little harder for him, or understands why he might not be performing as well as their kid is, or understands how hard it is just to be able to do this, right? To focus, and to make sure your feet don't hurt, and to make sure your stomach is, you don't have reflux coming up, and to make sure that the sensory issues around you are not bothering you to the extreme. I mean, there's just so much that this kid has to do just to be able to do these activities. And the general people wouldn't understand or realize or get that, but you do. And so that can feel isolating,
Mhm.
for sure.
There's so much they have to do in order to focus and
Right.
do quote unquote typical kiddo
Correct.
tasks. Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things with his school team, because Nate has had an IEP, ever since he was 3. And one of the things that I have written into his IEP is that I get to educate the team about 22Q. And it's not just about his unique learning profile or the issues that he has in regards to education. It's about, these are all the medical things that we're dealing with as well, right? So just for that kid to be able to sit in your chair, these are the 15 different things that he might be having struggle with. Or in gym class, if he's complaining of his legs hurting, it's not an excuse to get out of the activity. They probably really are hurting, and if he's asking to go to the bathroom a lot, you need to let him go, because it has nothing to do with, avoidance or whatever the case may be. It's like, I want them to understand not just the educational challenges, but also all of the emotional, behavioral, medical challenges that he manages on a daily basis to be in your classroom.
I think it's wonderful that you're teaching the teachers and educating them on all of these things. Like you said, if he says he has to go to the bathroom multiple times, he probably does.
Yeah.
And if his legs hurt, his legs probably hurt.
Right.
And that's something to be all warning signs and red flags for them to alert you and the nurse and let them know,
Right.
something's going on. That's great. Yeah, it's so important to get everybody on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a matter of educating, and sometimes it can be exhausting to do that.
Oh God. You're
Every
telling me,
year.
right?
Yep. Every year with a new school team
Yep.
but once they get it, and which is nice. How has his schooling been? Has it been difficult, challenging? Did you need to move schools? Tell me about that.
Sure. We've been very lucky. We have a great school district, and for the most part, they've been really open to learning and collaborating and working together as a team. That's not to say that there hasn't been bumps in the road, because there have. And, I've used the 22Q Foundation, Family Foundation's education station a couple times just to get the support that I needed to best present my issues, to my school team. So he has an IEP early on. Well, a lot of therapies are involved. Now it's just for some social work services, as well as some educational support. They have also an executive function classroom, which he's part of then too. But I think the thing that has really worked in our favor, and the thing that I always try to encourage other parents, is to realize their value as the part of that team, right? You are your child's expert. No one else is but you. And you come in educated and prepared and passionate about what it is that you want for your child. But I also think that it's important to show that you're also reasonable and willing to collaborate. It's so hard to fight this them against me kind of mentality when you go into these meetings. But you often have to remind yourself, and I do truly believe we all have the same end goal. In my experience, everyone there wants to help my kid, and I know that. I also know the constraints that they're under as part of the school district. And I remember early on, like, a teacher, we had the same end goal, but the teacher wanted to do something a little bit differently. And I was kind of really getting aggravated by it and kind of trying to get stubborn about it. And then I just stopped and I was like, there's no reason why we can't approach it this way. In particular, even if we say, sure, let's try it that way. Let's take data, let's look at it, let's circle back in 4 weeks and see, is it working, right? And it's okay to do that. So I think you go in with this passion, but you also go in with this willingness to collaborate and truly know that you are a member of that team. And I think you have greater success that way.
Beautifully said. It is very hard to go into those meetings, not with an aggressive or protectiveness, but to educate an open mind, but also know what your goals are. And because you know your son,
right?
You know what he needs. What are some of the bumps along the way? You said there were a few bumps in his education that were a little bit challenging.
Sure. I think early on, some of the behavior things, you'd have these seasoned teachers who would do things like, he didn't put his paper in the right file, and so he lost recess time or something, which drives me crazy. That's one of my my big things. So it's just really setting up a plan then. This is not because he's misbehaving. This is executive function type things. And how can we support him in getting a teacher might not have fully understood, why, or maybe even resented the way that, things then got set up or changed in your classroom. But that was for the best of what he needed, in that time. And I remember later, one of his teachers, we were in a conference, referred to him as being lazy. And I just knew from the start this was not a good teacher for him. But it took all of my control to not say the things that were running through my head. And his case manager was there and she knew it. So, and she was supportive in that moment as well. But, kind of just to reframe it as, so, okay, he has problems with initiation and follow through and attention. And lazy is based on your own perception, right? Your perception of effort is what you're judging someone as being lazy, because to you, that shouldn't take that much effort. But it's all perception, and you have no idea the effort that he has to go through to be able to do those things. So don't call him lazy.
Wow. Good thing that case manager was there that
Oh,
day.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. There would have been words. Earmuffs, Nate. Earmuffs.
Yeah, I know.
And I think it's important to share these struggles and these things that may happen, because for younger parents that might be listening, experience these
Right.
unfortunate things that sometimes happen. It's good to kind of hear what happened, how you went through it, and solve the problem. So
right. For the most part, his team this year is great. Like, he's starting to struggle some with science, and we really don't have any direct goals related around that. But I was just able to shoot an email off and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what we're experiencing. And they're like, okay, well, let's try this. I mean, they're very amenable to doing those kinds of things. And it doesn't take an arm and a leg for me to get them on board with that. I certainly am on top of it and, advocating and following up and doing all those things. But, we just haven't had that struggle. And I'm very thankful for that.
That's so good. What for you is the biggest struggle while navigating 22Q?
We've already talked about the unknown for sure. It's very hard to not live in the what ifs and to start to live in the what is, right? There's so much speculation that you can do. And there's only so much preparation that you can do. And for me in particular, I'm a doer, I'm a helper, I'm a thinker, I'm a researcher, and my husband would probably say I want control. I want to be in control of this situation, right? And you just can't, because you don't know what's coming your way. And the best that you can do is be educated about what you need to be educated about, and be prepared for what may come.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, personally, one of the hardest things is for me is so much of what we do, we live in a deficit model, right? We're looking at the things that are wrong. We're looking at the things that need to be fixed, right? You sit down in this IEP and there's 10 other people there who are essentially there to tell you what it is wrong about your kid. And every medical appointment you go to is looking at deficits. Everything is deficit based. And even me, like within my job, that's what I do as well. I look for this so I can help and try to fix. So it's hard to get out of that lens of always looking at what needs to be fixed. And this is a teachable moment. And, this is something that we can work on. It's not a fun way to live. And sometimes it takes some real effort to step back from that and not have that be your main focus when he's out playing baseball, right? Is, looking at all the things that he should be doing better, or how can we help him with that, and just really enjoying that he's doing a really great job pitching. He's awesome at that, or whatever the case may be. And that takes work. And I think that that's hard sometimes. It comes out of love and it comes out of wanting to do better, but it can just eat away at you then. And uh, that for sure has been a challenge.
It does take effort. It's a great point because at times you can be so nitpicky with make sure you're holding the fork the right way. Oh wait,
Right.
make sure you say your T's like
Correct.
and you're constantly like I do the same thing. I constantly nitpick, and
Yeah.
it's it is hard to step back and be like, he needs you to be his mom.
Yeah.
He just needs you to give him a hug and come sit and watch TV with him for a little bit
Right.
and just be silly. And
Right.
it's hard though. No, but
Yeah.
it's a great point.
Because I think I recognize that I don't want his view of me to be that. I don't want him to think of mom as the person who's constantly telling him what he needs to do better or what he needs to fix or change.
Mhm.
And some of it, that is what I have to do, but I don't want that to be the number one thing.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm really working on that right now. So I think that's very fresh on my mind too.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. And what would some of the struggles be that maybe your friends or family might not see?
Gosh, so much. I think a lot of what we hear from people is like, oh, you wouldn't even know anything's wrong, or, oh, he looks great, or, he's doing great in school. And I think, again, people don't realize how much it is for him to present that way, to be an eighth grade regular ed, to just do and be. So I think that level is certainly missing.
Mhm.
For us as a family, I think that people don't realize the amount of stress that there is involved with being a parent of kids with special needs.
Mhm.
I think I read somewhere like they compare it to the level of like combat soldiers. I mean, it's never ending. It's always there. And
Mhm.
while it may ebb and flow, it is something that we have to deal with all
Mhm.
the time.
Mhm.
And, people will say, like, I don't know how you do it, or, I wouldn't be able to do this if I were you. And my first thought, I always have to stop and say, okay, I know they're trying to be kind. I know that this is coming from a good place. But my second thought is like, we don't have a choice. This is life, right? And that's stress that along with it affects everything. It affects your emotional well-being, your physical well-being, your relationship with others, your things you do in the community. I mean, that stress is always there. So what I would hope is that people do recognize that, not only in their words, but then in their actions, right? So if we're a little late for carpool, or if I don't have time to talk to you at the grocery store, or seem off next time that you see me, to realize that there's this whole other level of things that we have to deal with. I mean, everybody has stress in their life, right? But
Mhm.
there's this whole other level that we also have combined that affects everything that we do.
Mhm. I struggle with this as well. People constantly say the same thing and it comes from a good place. And
Yeah,
it's also a place of where they don't know what else to say.
sure.
And I always think about like what would make me feel better? Like what would I want them to say instead of, "Oh, wow, he's doing so great." And where typically people don't say that about every kid.
Yeah,
Typically people say, "Oh, wow, he's gotten so big." And I know it's coming from a good place. So
right.
it's hard.
Yeah. Can I tell you what the best compliment I ever received was? And I really, it kind of addresses what you said, like what you would want someone to say. It was just out of nowhere, at a family party. One of my cousin's wife, said, Eileen, I can tell that despite the challenges you face, you guys live a good and happy life. And that just really just stuck with me because it was so meaningful, and it acknowledged that, hey, I know things are hard for you, but it also acknowledged, hey, I see that this doesn't define who you guys are as a family. Of the challenges and the hardships and the stress, we don't let that define us, that we let these other things define us. And that truly, like, to this day is ingrained in my brain because it was just one of the best things I had ever heard.
That is beautiful. I love it. She saw you
Yeah, right.
and she said, "You're doing a great job."
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love it. If you could go back to the moment when when he was 3.5 and you're standing in the doctor's office and they showed you the book of what 22q was, and you could go back to that moment and say something to yourself, what would you say?
I think I would remind myself that I can manage hard things and that Nate can manage hard things. Our family can manage hard things. Not that there will never be hard things and not that we'll get through this easily, because life is often difficult. It often really stinks, but that we will be able to go through it and get by it and not live in it. That we will be able to not have it define us, and that, we can manage whatever comes our way.
I love that. Beautiful. That's a beautifully said. And what keeps you going? What do you do for you?
It's easier now that my kids are older to find time to do things for me. I really like to be involved in my community. So I volunteer at our food pantry. I go meet people at the local bar and write postcards to get out the vote. I work at the children's community closet when I can, and in a short story book club at my library. Like I find my little things. I guess I'm kind of like Nate in that I don't mind doing things where I don't know anybody and I'm going to go and try them. Right. So I definitely make time for that. I also make time to connect with friends and family, because I think that's important too. So I think there's so much that I do for my kids that it's equally as important right now to make sure that I'm finding these times to do things for me. And also, it's very important that I continue to work, even though it is just part-time. I find value in what I do.
It is equally as important to
Yeah.
take care of you. And in order to be a good parent, you have to
Right.
take that time. And it's
Yep.
hard.
Yeah.
It is hard. And what has Nate taught you?
So much. I would say right now, the thing that I feel like he's teaching me the most is how to look at things from a different perspective or from a different lens, right? I talked about not wanting to be so deficit based or look at things with different eyes. And it's really just learning with him as he goes along. So I think, for example, for the longest time, doing homework with him was such a struggle because if he wasn't getting a concept, I knew he could, right? And I knew his capabilities, and let's just do 3 more, or let's just do 5 more, and you'll get it. And my husband was so much better at saying, "You're done, walk away," and I was just looking from like, I know he can do this though, right? He can do this. And I really recently have just started looking at that differently and thought, what is important to me? Is it important that he knows the phases of the moon? No, that's not important. But what is important is I want him to have work ethic. I want him to be able to find his mistakes and ask for help, right? I want him to learn perseverance, right? Those are the things that are important. So we kind of sat back and together came up with, instead of reviewing every math problem, he picks 3. And, I said, and he's learning to pick the 3 that might have been harder for him. And, he knows that we could talk it through, and then we do, and we're done. We moved on. So the skills that I want from him to develop, we're still helping develop, but it's not that he has to get this perfectly, or he has to get this right, or he has to, have that memorized. It's more so, what do I want out of this moment? What I want him to learn out of this moment, and being able to look at that differently has been huge. So I really think he's helping me look at things from a different way and trying to change my perspective.
I love what you said, learning with him. I love that. Learning with him. It's a great way to put it. It's not going to be black and white. It's going to be gray.
Right.
And you've got to be okay with the gray. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Nate.
Sure.
I didn't know this much about him before, and it's just been a joy getting to know him a little bit more. And on my journey of 22Q, I've been learning as well. And someone once told me, you know, make sure you give yourself the same kindness that you show others.
Yeah.
And I want to pass that on to you because I see you as an amazing mom. Nate is so lucky to have you. And geez, I hope you know that with all your heart, how lucky he is to have you as his mom.
Well, I will thank you. That's high praise coming from you. I feel the same. So it's good to hear those things because every now and then you need someone to pump you up that way. But all of us moms can remember that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Is there anything else you want to add that I may not have touched upon?
I know I do want to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about one of the things that we talked about is living in grief, right? And experiencing grief. And I think as special needs parents, the grief is never ending, kind of like the stress is never ending. You have grief for all these medical things that are coming your way, and the experience when you start to see, your child and his peers begin to grow, or the grief about what the future may be. You're experiencing it all the time, and you also live though in this weird combination of grief and gratitude, because in the same time, well, I may be grieving, that he's can no longer play baseball, or couldn't keep up with his peers, or that he might take longer to drive. I also have gratitude, and I know that the things that I'm grieving, there's parents out there who are just hoping their kid can walk and talk and not be hospitalized, and that's not lost on me. It's really not. So it's just this also weird place that we live in where those two emotions are coexisting. You are acknowledging both of them. It's not to say you shouldn't grieve those things. You can, but that you also need to have gratitude for all that your child does have and is able to do. So it's just something else that a special needs parent experiences that probably many other parents don't.
Yeah, I'm definitely taking that and going to use that again. Grief and gratitude.
Yeah.
They balance each other out as a special needs parent, and right on point.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you again
Sure.
for being
Thank you.
on today.
It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Oh, it was a pleasure, and I just can't thank you enough. So thank you again.
Sure. Take care.
Thank you, Eileen, for sharing Nate with us today. And he is such a lucky guy to have you as his mom. And for anyone who would like to contact me, you can reach me at 22qpodcast@gmail.com with any questions, concerns, or if you're interested on being on this podcast. Until next time, thank you again, and please share this and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And never forget, 22Q family, that you are not alone.